The night stretched heavy over the ranch, an endless black sky swallowing the last traces of twilight. The barn stood at the edge of the property like a ghost of something older than memory, its paint peeled and its rafters bowed under years of wind and silence. Inside, a single bulb swayed on its cord, spilling a weak yellow glow that reached only a few feet into the dark. Dust floated through the air like slow snow, the smell of hay and rust mixed with something coppery and faintly sweet, something that didn't belong there. Ethan stood near the center of the room, his boots sunk halfway into the dirt floor. His breath came short and uneven. Sweat clung to his forehead, though the air was cold enough to sting. His hands trembled uncontrollably, smeared with a dark stain that wouldn't wash away no matter how hard he rubbed them against his jeans. He hadn't meant for any of it to happen. It was supposed to be a simple evening chore, one of 100 he did every day without thinking: feed the calves, check the stalls, make sure the gates were latched. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, had taken hold of him. Now the silence of the barn seemed alive, pulsing with a kind of quiet accusation. The rancher was there too, standing just beyond the circle of light. Mr. Calder didn't move or speak for a long time. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and weathered by years under the sun, a man who believed in hard work and few words. The brim of his hat hid most of his face, leaving only the faint glint of his eyes visible. Those eyes were fixed on Ethan with an expression the boy couldn't read. It wasn't anger exactly, but it wasn't mercy either. The cattle shifted uneasily in their pens. Every sound felt too loud: the creak of wood, the rattle of a chain, the soft whine of wind through the cracks in the wall. Ethan felt like the barn itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. He wanted to explain, to say that he hadn't meant to hurt anything, that it was an accident, but the words tangled in his throat. All he could manage were broken sounds, half-formed pleas swallowed by the dark. Calder finally moved, slow and deliberate. The straw between his teeth shifted as he turned his head. His boots made soft, deliberate steps in the dirt, each one echoing in Ethan's chest. When he came into the light, the boy could see the hard lines of his face, the deep cuts of age and sun, and the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. There was a smell of tobacco and horses and something else, something metallic, like old blood. Ethan's gaze darted toward the far corner where the small form lay motionless under a torn piece of burlap. His stomach twisted and he looked away. The calf had been breathing when he found it, weak but alive, its small ribs rising and falling in the straw. He had wanted to understand what made it live, what happened inside its body when it breathed, and that want had driven him to pick up the knife from the workbench. He hadn't expected the sounds it made, hadn't expected the way it had looked at him when the blade first touched skin. He had told himself it was already dying, that he was only helping it along, but now the truth of that lie sat heavy in the pit of his stomach. Calder's voice finally broke the silence. It came low and rough, like gravel scraping the bottom of a bucket. The words didn't matter as much as the weight of them. They pressed down on Ethan, leaving no space for air. The boy's knees weakened, and he felt the heat of tears stinging his eyes. He wanted forgiveness, or at least understanding, but there was none in the rancher's face. There was only judgment, the kind that came from a man who had seen too much and buried too many things that couldn't be spoken of again. The bulb flickered once, then steadied. The shadows stretched and curled along the walls like smoke. Somewhere outside, a coyote cried, long and mournful, and then the sound faded into the wind. Inside the barn, only two people remained: the old rancher, still and silent, and the boy, shaking in the dim light, waiting for whatever would come next. The barn was darker now, the faint yellow of the bulb struggling against the shadows that pooled in the corners. The air had grown thick, heavy with the coppery scent of blood and the dust of trampled hay. Ethan's body trembled uncontrollably, each breath shaking as though the cold itself had infiltrated his lungs. His eyes flicked nervously around the room, settling briefly on the form of the calf, which lay crumpled beneath the burlap, its small chest still rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of the rafters, the faint scuttle of rats in the corner, the soft lowing of the cattle in their pens, all blending into a chorus that pressed against his temples. His stomach churned, bile rising, but he swallowed it down. There was no escaping what had already begun. Calder moved through the shadows like a predator, deliberate, unhurried. He emerged from the dim light holding something that caught Ethan's eye immediately. A long, rusted branding iron, its end glowing faintly, red-hot from the coals he must have stoked outside. The heat radiated from it in a wave, and Ethan flinched, stepping back instinctively. The rancher's broad hands gripped it with ease, and there was a quiet, terrifying certainty in the way he held it. Every step Calder took toward him seemed measured, controlled, leaving Ethan frozen where he stood. The light from the iron danced across the walls, casting shifting shadows that made the barn feel alive, like the structure itself had leaned closer to watch. Ethan's mind raced, thinking of excuses, of pleas that might convince Calder to stop. He could feel the weight of his guilt pressing down, suffocating, making it hard to breathe. The heat from the iron seemed to reach across the room, touching his skin even before Calder got close. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the acrid smell of burning iron, filling Ethan's nose with a sharp, choking reminder of what had happened earlier. He wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but his legs refused to move. His body was locked in place, as if some unseen force had pinned him in the center of the barn, forcing him to face what was coming. Calder's voice finally broke the silence, low and deliberate, almost calm. It carried a weight that made the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand on end. There was no mercy in the tone, only the quiet certainty of a man who had seen far too much to be startled. A man who had dealt with lives and mistakes in a way that left no room for hesitation. Each word seemed to stretch the seconds longer, pulling them taut like a bowstring ready to snap. Ethan's hands shook, fingers curling into fists at his sides as if that small gesture could somehow protect him. The rancher moved closer, and the barn seemed to close in around them. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim light, swirling as the air stirred with Calder's deliberate steps. The glowing iron reflected in the boy's wide eyes, making the shadows dance across the walls in grotesque patterns. Somewhere the cattle bellowed again, a deep, mournful sound that echoed off the wooden beams, as if the animals themselves sensed the terror in the room. Ethan's knees weakened, and he sank slightly toward the dirt floor, but he could not look away. The sight of the iron, the smell of blood, and the shadow of what was about to happen left him paralyzed. Time stretched, each second a sharp cut through the quiet. There was a tension in the air that pressed against Ethan's chest, making it hard to inhale fully. He could feel the inevitability of what Calder intended, the slow, unflinching approach of a man who had long since stopped fearing consequences. The barn was alive with anticipation, the walls seeming to lean closer, the rafters whispering secrets of things that should never be witnessed. Ethan's stomach churned violently, bile rising again, and he could hear the distant howl of the wind outside. But there was no escape. Calder's shadow fell over him fully now, and the glow from the branding iron painted his face in harsh streaks of red and gold. Ethan's eyes filled with tears that he could no longer hold back, streaming down his face and mixing with the grime and sweat. The barn seemed to grow quieter, all other sounds fading into a tense silence. The boy's world had narrowed to a single point: the glowing iron, the cold certainty in the rancher's movements, and the awful understanding that there would be no turning back from what was about to happen.